I'm going to, here's Lauren from New Jersey. Welcome, Lauren. Great. Well, I'm going to get started and people can keep joining as we get going. Conscious of time, want to respect all of you who've logged in on time today. So hello and welcome. My name is Alison Hendricks. I am the CEO and founder of Simply Stakeholders. After working in stakeholder engagement for many years, advising government and businesses on how to do stakeholder engagement, I came to realize that we needed better tools to manage it. We spent a lot of time collecting large amounts of data, and then we didn't really do very much with it. We didn't do much analysis or evaluation or even using it in the decisions and the processes that we run. So that's what started me on this journey. And many years later, we developed Darzen and Simply Stakeholders. And today our software is used by hundreds of organizations all around the world. And we love working with government, businesses, and lots of different sectors. It gives us a great insight into the practice of stakeholder engagement and stakeholder management. And we love to share some of our experience with you in webinars like this. So today's session, we're going to initially start with looking at what do we mean by the term stakeholder relationship management. I think it's important that we're all on the same page with that definition. So that's what we're going to start with. We're then going to look at who primarily does stakeholder engagement, stakeholder relationship management, and what sort of benefits they're looking for it. And then the main part of the session today is looking at 10 steps for success. This is really sharing some of what we've observed over the years working with organizations. What are some of the critical things that have, impacted the success those organizations have had? And obviously we spend a lot of time thinking about why some organizations are not successful with it so that we can improve it in our processes and our software. So it's something that's always top of mind for us. And I'll make sure we have some time at the end for some questions and answers. Today's session, as I mentioned, is going to be quite interactive. I'd love for you to put your comments and thoughts in the chat function. There'll be a poll or two, so please share your thoughts in the chat especially. It makes it much more useful and interesting for the rest of the participants if it can be quite interactive. So let's get going. What do we mean when we're talking about stakeholder relationship management? And here I'd really like to make a distinction between stakeholder relationship management and stakeholder engagement. Stakeholder engagement goes by many terms. You might use the term public participation, citizen engagement, community consultation, community involvement. There's various terms used in different parts of the world. I think in the US in particular, North America, public participation is often, or citizen engagement are the sort of probably the dominant terms, although I think emerging, the term stakeholder engagement is kind of, there's a bit coalescing around that as being the sort of the main term people use. But whatever term you use for it, whether you're doing internal engagement or external engagement, I want to kind of think about this stakeholder relationship management as a little bit separate from the actual engagement or participation process. Think of it as stakeholder relationship management could be like the foundations of the house you built. The house itself is the engagement. The relationship management systems and processes are your foundation. Of course, you can build a house without foundations, but it's not going to stand up to the first gust of strong wind that comes around or weather event. And it's hard to add foundations after you've built your house. It rarely works. So foundations, laying the foundations through a really robust and systemized stakeholder relationship management process and systems can really help you build a really solid foundation for your house. Okay, so that's kind of what I mean. Now, I'm going to just pause there for a minute. Is that clear to people and we understand that distinction? Because that's really important for what we're going to cover in the rest of the session today. We're not really looking at best practice stakeholder engagement. We have run lots of webinars on that. We've got lots of resources on our website on that topic. But, and I think, we don't really spend enough time thinking about the processes and the systems that we use that underpin our stakeholder engagement. We don't often look at what is it that kind of can help or hinder the engagement processes. So that's really the primary focus of today's webinar, looking at the systems and processes for identifying stakeholders, analysing their needs and concerns, and then planning and managing the implementation of your engagement processes. I'm just going to see if there's any comments on here. Not yet. Hopefully that's clear and we're all on the same page in relation to where we're at with this definition. So time for a quick poll, since you're being a bit shy. Let me know, where is your organisation currently? Where do you currently sit in relation to, either stakeholder engagement or stakeholder relationship management as a sort of formal process? Are you just getting started? Are you doing it extensively? Right, we're seeing quite a mix coming through here. Fairly balanced between just getting started occasionally and doing it regularly on key projects. Brilliant, thank you for that. That's pretty common, right? So a lot of organizations we talk to are fairly early in their journey with stakeholder engagement. Often it's the first time they're using a system when they go to implement our stakeholder management platform. So it's, very, very common. Who do we see using stakeholder management? I think this industry really saw its roots in industries like, when I say this industry, I mean stakeholder engagement really kind of came out of the mining, natural resources and energy sort of industries. And also government to a large extent. Government had a requirement to engage citizens, but the mining, natural resources industries really understood the concept of social risk. So they were really driven from a risk management perspective. They had to get permits for their projects and processes, and in order to get those permits, they realised they needed to engage with their stakeholders. So they were fairly early adopters of this process, but today we see this right across all sectors: education, health, infrastructure. A lot of organisations, large corporates now are also looking at sort of their own internal engagement in terms of understanding who their own stakeholders are internally within the organisation, as well as external engagement. So certainly a growing sector. Generally, they're looking, for better outcomes of their projects, or seeing faster project approvals, lowered risk. Those are the sort of benefits they're looking for. This is a bit of an old study. I think this was KPMG or Deloitte, one of those big companies. We should have had the source down here, sorry. But I think it was McKinsey, actually. They surveyed CEOs and board directors to see how important they saw stakeholder engagement, and you can see it increasing over the years. So this, I think if they did the study again, we'd see a big uptick in 2022, 23. So what is it that organisations, particularly those who are just getting started on this journey, what can you do to ensure success? Now, as I said earlier, I'm not approaching this from a perspective of what is a great stakeholder engagement process or what do you need to be successful with your project. I'm really looking at what are the foundations you can put in place that are going to help you succeed with your stakeholder engagement. These 10 steps, they're not necessarily linear. I had trouble ordering them when I was working on the list of steps. They're more driven by the things we've seen gone wrong. So the organisations that, with the best of intentions, who've embarked on this journey but failed to really sort of initiate or see success, what were the common themes with them, and what were the common themes with organizations who were successful. So that's where these 10 steps come from. So the first step is really identifying your objectives for the relationship management. Okay, so this is separate to your objectives for your project or your overall organization. These are not your stakeholder engagement objectives. These are, and we don't often do this. I rarely see organizations setting in place objectives for how will we determine, what are we trying to achieve with our relationships, and taking both that short-term and long-term view. What are our long-term objectives in terms of relationship management? Taking a view at a team level as well as the entire organization. What is our organization, looking to achieve? The social, environmental, ESG sort of framework, CSR framework, corporate social responsibility or environment, social governance framework also needs to play a part in here. So with that in mind, that this whole movement of stakeholder capitalism, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but that's really, a lot of businesses signing up to this idea that the purpose of business is not just to make money for its shareholders, but it's also to, look after all its stakeholders, and that could be its employees, its suppliers, the environment. It's a much broader remit. And that's very much in line with what community expectations are of organizations today. So with that in mind, what is your objective in terms of the actual stakeholder relationships that you're seeking to manage? So start with identifying the objectives. Then the next and critical, step for any successes is really to identify and analyze your stakeholders. It's a step that's often missed, surprisingly. So, I think a big challenge a lot of organizations face is just how do we get a shared up-to-date list of stakeholders and get some visibility over it. People have it sitting in spreadsheets or OneNote documents or in their email accounts. It's all over the place. So just getting that visibility and understanding who your stakeholders are, mapping them out. There's a lot of frameworks out there for stakeholder mapping, whether you're using the interest, influence, impact framework, which is very common, or any framework that you choose. And again, we have a lot of resources on stakeholder analysis on our website. I'd encourage you to go have a look at that. But pick a framework and then do some, desktop analysis of who your stakeholders are, who do you have on your list, where are the missing, voices, who's missing from that list. Then look at some of their needs, who else has an interest, and by interest, this could be a social, cultural, economic, right? So think about interest in a broader context. Who has an interest in the work that you do and that should be involved in this process? Have you considered marginalized groups? There's a lot of requirements. If you look at any of the sort of best practice guidelines, like the IFC guidelines, World Bank guidelines, International Association of Public Participation, they all talk about making sure that we involve marginalized groups in our engagement processes. So, are they represented? Is your stakeholder list representative? And then, so at a core level, you want to at least do that, understanding who's on your list, who's missing, making sure there's no critical missing voices, right? So think of that as being your base level. And then if you want to take it further, get into your stakeholder mapping, then start looking at mapping out networks and connections between stakeholders. Who else are they connected to? And ideally, you want to involve the stakeholders themselves in the process. How do they want to be involved? Ask them, right? The best part of success is really, engaging with them really early on. Understand what they need from you. It's not a one-way street anymore. We need to kind of consider what their expectations are and how can we best meet them. So analysis, identification analysis, critical step. Create a stakeholder management plan. So I'm seeing increasingly a lot of organizations are creating plans, but I'm not seeing a lot of great plans out there, to be honest. I think plans tend to be quite complex. Often a consultant may be involved in creating the plan for the organization. It's huge. I mean, it's a good plan in itself. It's robust. It's got lots of analysis. But for me, a really good plan is one that actually gets read, understood, owned, and implemented, right? Really basic requirements, but if you can see plans being actioned, regularly updated, reported, there's reporting against the plan, I think that those are all good signs of a good plan. You also want your stakeholder management plan to provide some clear strategic direction, doing the right things, not just doing things better or doing, getting better at your processes, but what is that you're actually trying to do? What should you be doing? Regular evaluation includes stakeholder identification and analysis, the step we talked about just before, clear strategies and priorities, and clearly articulates the responsibilities. We have a really nice one-page plan template that you can download for free on our website. Worth checking out, right? The beauty of a one-page plan is that there's a very high chance that people will actually read it. And it forces you to be really concise and really strategic to get it to fit on that page. So if you don't have a stakeholder management plan in place right now for your organization, check that out. It might be a good starting point for you. Step 4, you really need to start thinking about privacy legislation. There's various standards across the US, certainly across the world. Europe and Canada probably have the highest standards in terms of privacy legislation. In Europe, it's called the GDPR. But California, the relatively new legislation in California is very similar level to the GDPR. So you really need to be conscious of this now. Where is your data stored and how is it stored? Is it encrypted? A lot of jurisdictions now requiring you to have it encrypted. If you work in the health sector, for example, you really need that. Transparency. Can you demonstrate exactly where you got the data, how you got it, and how you're using it? A lot of these privacy legislation requires you to give your stakeholders a right to access the information you're storing on them, the right to be forgotten, which means you've got to scrub their details anywhere you have it, right? And if you're, dealing with multiple spreadsheets and things like that, this could get quite tricky, right? To go and track down that information and scrub it. Also giving people the right to unsubscribe. So you really need to start thinking about the privacy requirements really early on in your process, because it will also influence what information you collect, ensuring that you actually have a legitimate basis for asking for that information and storing it. We might be curious to know someone's, income range or health issues or marital status, right? But is it relevant? Is it relevant to the work you're doing? And do you have a right to ask that information and keep it? And if it's health information, then the bar for how you store that information has just gotten higher. Okay, so something that I think more organizations need to have top of mind early on. Make sure you have a privacy statement as well, some way that's easy for people to access and view, and which clearly articulates exactly what you're storing on them and how you're storing it, right? So that's often part of the legislation too. Step 5, obviously we think, having a stakeholder management system in place is going to really help you with that. We'd love you to be using our system, but really any system you use is going to be better than not having a system at all. And even if, your system is a spreadsheet, a really, customized spreadsheet you create, that's okay. It's a good starting point as well. Not everyone has a budget to invest in a system, but create one, right? Don't let everyone do it in an ad hoc manner. What you want to get is that one single source of truth of all the information on your stakeholders. You want to create an up-to-date and shared list of stakeholders that's well segmented and well organized. And the best way you can do that is if you actually think about setting up a system to, gather and organize that information. Sorry, I just noticed. Question from Meg. Does your software automatically encrypt information? Yes. All of our data is encrypted in transit, so anytime it's moving from one place to the other, and at rest, which means when it's stored as well. The other importance of setting up a system, what you'd be looking to do is managing the complex relationships you have with stakeholders. So if we're trying to create an organization-wide shared list of stakeholders, how do we kind of manage complex relationships? So one team might have a very different relationship with the same stakeholder. The stakeholder themselves could wear multiple hats. They could be a small business owner in the local area, but also be on one of the local council, or on an industry advisory body, right? So people wear multiple hats. How do we track our relationship with them when they're that complex, but also have visibility over it? So when I look at a stakeholder, I can see who else in my organization is interacting with them, in what capacity and for what purpose, right? So setting up whatever system you're using to manage those complex relationships, really important. Tracking interactions, getting some visibility of what's been happening. So you don't, how many of us have heard examples of people who turn up to a meeting with a stakeholder only to find out that someone else from another team has just met with them last week and maybe told them something completely different, right? Really, really super common occurrence, particularly in the government sector, where you've got large organizations with complex sort of, remits that they're working on. Very easy to happen. So that's why you want to have that, not tracking every single thing that is being done, but all the important interaction, the important meetings. So at a glance, you can at least see when you last interacted with them, when someone from your team last interacted with them, and what was it about. The next step, of course, would be to use that information, right? Do some analysis of the feedback, the issues and the sentiment, so that you can actually get some value out of it. People are investing a lot of time in giving you their feedback and making comments. You're investing a lot of time in collecting that information. Now let's analyze it. Let's get some insights from it. Being able to have auditable records, really important in lots of sectors. If you're in a renewable energy company or a mining company, for example, you could get legal challenges to your project, and being able to demonstrate that you have in fact consulted with and met with stakeholders can often make those legal challenges, just go away. If you're in a government agency and you're developing policy, for example, you need to be able to demonstrate that you have involved the right people, that they have had an equitable opportunity to participate, and that their feedback was incorporated in what you were doing. So being able to, that transparency and audit trail, really important. Getting some regular reporting done, and then really important to also retain organizational knowledge, right? So this is something that we were talking about, taking a long-term view of what you do with your data. So that gets into this idea of the organization really owns those relationships for the long term, regardless of the project or the staff members involved. And how do you retain that as an organization? How do you keep it and build on it? Right? I spoke to an organization, a really large organization just the other day, and they said the entire team, that was doing external relations and corporate affairs had left within 6 months of each other, and all of the information sort of has walked out the door with them. So no retention of that information. They had no idea, where to even start. There were bits and pieces around, but it was a completely new team. They didn't, they were struggling to piece together exactly who was critical to engage and where did they start? What did we last do with them? What's our health with those people? Health of the relationship with those people. So really challenging situation, right? And it's not uncommon. I hear it a lot. And especially these days, we've all heard of the Great Resignation and lots of layoffs and things happening at the moment. You have to be really careful that everything you're investing in developing stakeholder relationships is something you can retain and own as an organization. So lots of advantages to setting up a system, whatever that system might be. Another thing we see is that data structure is really critical. So often when people will start collecting information, be it in a spreadsheet or stakeholder management system, they want to just start recording everything, right? We don't spend enough time thinking about structure and configuration. And one of the things we always advise our clients when they start with us is to say, start with the end in mind. What do you need to know from this data? What are you trying to report on? Remember, step one, identify your objectives. What are your objectives? What are your metrics? And let's design your data structure around that, right? So it means that we collect information that's going to be really important for our reporting, and also that we don't collect information we're not going to use, which is super common in this industry. We collect a lot of stuff, we never use it, right? So we don't need any more make busy work. We want to collect the right information. So really important to spend some time thinking about it. But on the flip side of that is that we see a lot of organizations get stuck at this stage. The analysis paralysis trap. They want to get the perfect configuration. They don't know really what they should be tracking. So they spend a lot of time doing internal engagement and trying to identify what should we be tracking and how should we track it. They come up with a structure, and then 2 months later they want to change it completely because there's new people involved, and they never really move beyond this step, right? So, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Something good, like get a pretty good structure in place and start with it. You can iterate, but don't just keep iterating because you've come up with a new idea. You're never going to get any data then that you can kind of go back and review and see how you're progressing. A good tip would be to try and benchmark with others in your industry. See what other renewable energy companies are doing, or mining companies or government agencies. It's not, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. If you can find some examples of what others are doing, we often start our customers with like a best practice template. We've created industry best practice templates based on our experience of working with people in various industries. And that's often a great starting point for them. We say, look, here's what other organizations just like yours are doing. Maybe this can be a good starting point. Have a look at it and build on it from here. And my last tip with this one is less is more. Keep it as simple as possible, right? Don't try to make it too complex. If you're starting from nothing and you're trying to, immediately go from 0 to 100, it's really difficult, right? So compromise if you need to. Make the process of recording data really easy. This is also, it's linked to the previous step of, where I said compromise on the data structure. Less is more. I think if it's simple and you're asking less of people, you're more likely to get people to put in the information. You want to compromise on quantity in favor of quality. It's much better to have a small amount of quality data that's really consistent and reliable than it is to have a lot of data that's, of varying quality. It's inconsistent. You can't rely on any of the stats because you don't know if it's just, wasn't done the same way by different teams or different individuals in the same team, right? Have a look at where you can automate processes, leverage AI if you can, artificial intelligence. There's a lot more of that, more easily accessible these days, even if your system doesn't include artificial intelligence. We try to use a bit of that in our software, but we're just scratching the surface. There's so much it can do these days. So look into various things, various tools that can help you. Simple things like, there's loads of AI tools that will take notes at your meeting and transcribe them. So that it's really easy to keep a record of the notes of the meeting without having to go and type them up later on. Really simple tool, but it can help. Right? Excuse me 1 second. Step 8, what metrics are you going to use to make sure that you are on track? This is really important. People often don't think about the reporting and evaluation at all, or they only start thinking about it right at the end and then discover they haven't collected the right sort of information. Create some SMART goals. You know what that SMART acronym stands for? You know, specific, measurable, actionable, reportable, and time-based. I don't know, I could have made that up. You might have to Google it. But basically what you want is very specific goals that you can actually measure and that have a specific time frame, right? No great big statements. We want to have beautiful relationships with our stakeholders. We want them to all love us. You know, it's really hard to measure. Let's go for something smaller and more specific that we can actually see whether we're making progress on it or not. Maybe you want, because we're thinking about objectives and goals for the actual systems and processes underpinning your stakeholder engagement, then maybe you need some metrics around the quality of your records or the completeness of them. So think about, governance, process, and accountability as the framework you're using in identifying the appropriate metrics. And again, here I would go less is more. Pick 1 or pick 3 metrics and only track those for the first 3 months. Once the team's used to that, maybe you add another metric in the next quarter, right? So go slow, but be consistent. Consider the human factor. This is often the least spoken about, but, factor, but often the biggest kind of impact on success. So people are time poor, so they're often reluctant to keep records. But people also, have difficulty adapting to change. If you look at the percentage of early adopters in any population, it's like less than 10%. Less than 10% of us love to adopt new technology and new systems and new processes. We love change, but for the vast majority of the population, change is confronting and it's challenging, it's difficult, right? So you've got to be really aware of that in your process. The other big issue we see a lot of big organizations in particular come across is this reluctance to share information. So people, quite naturally believe that the relationships they have with stakeholders, they've invested time and energy into, they own the relationship, even though they, were doing it as part of their job. It's their relationship, it's their source of power, and they don't want to share it. Maybe they're afraid other people will mess up that relationship. Someone will start spamming them with irrelevant information, or just, go in boots and all and kind of wreck the relationship. So there's various reasons why people don't want to share their information and therefore don't want to record it in the system. And therefore the organization can't build that sort of knowledge base of, the complete history of relationship with stakeholders. So you've got to be really aware of it. That there is no easy answer to that. You've got to be aware of it. You've got to show people what's in it for them. Show them some tangible benefits of how it's going to make their lives easier or their work easier, right? Or recognize where they have done something great, where they have got some, great relationships. One of the things we put into DAS and our other platform was a points tracking system, right? And it gave assigned points for everything people did. And it was surprisingly, we were just sort of dabbling with this idea of, what motivates people to put in information or keep systems up to date. And we wanted to acknowledge different skill levels, that, someone was developing proficiency in it and that it was kind of part of their strength then because they had this level of proficiency. But we also wanted to kind of introduce a little bit of a competitive element, who's on the top of the leaderboard for the team. And it was surprisingly effective. I mean, it is surprisingly effective, I should say. It's still in there. Because it really motivates people to do it because they're getting the recognition for the work that they're putting in, as well as kind of something that they can take away, which is they can put on their CV or LinkedIn or whatever that, they've developed this proficiency. So you've really got to consider that, right? And that, which leads me to my last step. It's a change management process, right? You've got to think of it as an internal engagement process and actually run it in that way so that you take people on a journey with you, put in place some adequate training and support for them, identify some milestones on this journey, right? Some quick wins to encourage people to keep going. So what are the milestones along the way to getting to those objectives that you set in step one? How can we make sure that we are on track? Question, what percentage of clients use the point system? Surprisingly, it's the larger government or really large infrastructure projects use it. I think when they've got really big teams of hundreds of people using the system, they find it effective. One of our clients in the UK used to run a competition because they knew they had to do their reporting, at the end of month. And so to encourage people to put in all their update the records in the last week of the month, they'd just run a competition and have prizes, like whoever topped the leaderboard would get tickets to the cinema or into the movies. There were small prizes, but it was really effective for them. Another of our government clients in Australia has his T-shirts, and they give people whoever makes a certain amount of points, they get different T-shirts. They call it Dars and Dazzlers, which makes our team very jealous because we all want one of those T-shirts as well. But yeah, if people are quite creative with it to motivate their teams, right, to keep the information in there. So I didn't put this poll in, but maybe you can pop this into the chat function. Do you guys manage your stakeholder relationships in a systematic kind of process? Do you have an SRM system in place? What are people using now? Share some thoughts in the chat. We see a lot of, Excel spreadsheets, very common. We see a lot of people using OneNotes. I've seen some quite horrific OneNotes, to be quite frank, with just like a crazy amount of information in there. Yeah, spreadsheets, that's really common. Oh, great. Okay, so you can keep adding your comments in there. I'm going to skip past this one and this one, excuse me. So just to summarize then, some of the key steps to success would be to start with identifying your key objectives and goals. Why are you doing the stakeholder management? What are you hoping to get out of it? What are your objectives? And in relation to the relationship management processes and systems and outcomes, right? Design your processes around those objectives so that you can, be very specific and targeted and strategic with them. Get a dedicated solution if you can. It will definitely help, give you a bit of a shortcut to success. Leverage existing tools where possible and practical, right? You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Look what's out there. Focus on adoption and make it easy and fun if possible. This would be like, me personally, this is one of my critical learning, being in this space. So I've come to this stakeholder management from a practitioner point of view, not as a software kind of geek kind of person. And, because I'm one of those people who loves new technology and loves trying out new things, initially in the early years, our focus was really on what else can we build, and let's create something completely new. Let's create a way to do qualitative analysis that's easy and fun. And, we were always building new things and new tools and new functions. And for the last sort of 5 or 6 years, we really kind of understood that adoption is so important and usability is so important. And really that's where Simply Stakeholders came from. this idea that we needed a really simple tool, but still had that smart, methodology behind it, but super easy for people as a step up from spreadsheets, for example. Not daunting, because people would often look at JARS and say, we love that, but, it's too much for us right now. So we wanted to create a way to make it easy for people to start this journey of doing more robust stakeholder engagement. We really believe it's going to, help organizations make better decisions, build better relationships, build better reputations. So, adoption and making it easy and fun is really critical, probably the most critical thing I would say in all of these steps. Think of it as a journey, take on more advanced things in stages. So even when we looked at stakeholder analysis, for example, start with the basics. Who are our stakeholders? Who's missing from this list? Even if you just get an up-to-date, well-organized list, that's a great start. Then look at stakeholder mapping. When you've got, on top of that, start looking at stakeholder network mapping, right? Build on it. It's a journey. Focus on metrics and reporting. This is something I'm really passionate about. I believe if we measure it, if we report on it, then we focus on it and we do it, right? And we focus, we're more strategic with what we're doing and how we're doing it. So always build in reporting and evaluation into your processes. And that's it from me. So if you'd like to see our software, pop a note in the chat or get in touch. The team will get in touch with you after this. We'd be really happy to show you how we do it. You might just pick up some tips on how to even structure your existing sort of processes or system in a better way. We're happy to do that. That's no problem. Questions? It says we use 17 hats to manage projects, but it doesn't coordinate stakeholders. Yeah. A lot of those systems like Asana, Monday, they're good for task management, but they don't have that concept of stakeholders. And they don't, and because stakeholder engagement involves complex relationships, it's harder to track it, right? Because the same person is involved in so many different initiatives, or wears so many different hats. You couldn't find the one-page plan on your site. Okay, we'll send out a link to it. I'm sorry, I can't remember where exactly it is. Glad you liked it, Grace. Please give me some feedback if you found anything useful in the session. It helps us. We love to share our knowledge and our experience with the industry. But we need to know what you want to hear. So let us know if you've got questions, feedback. Very welcome. And very open to hearing it. Okay, if there's no other questions, we might wrap it up here and give you 15 minutes back in your day. Thank you so much for joining us today. Get in touch with us anytime. We're really, thankful that you spent this time with us, and we hope to see you again on another webinar or event. Goodbye.